When we picture beauty in the Middle Ages, we often imagine the elegant ladies from paintings and tapestries, sitting in candlelit halls with pale, perfect skin and carefully braided hair. These images make them look peaceful, almost like they lived without worry. But the truth was far more demanding. Beauty was not just about being admired. It was a duty, a public performance, and for many women, a heavy burden they carried every day. From the moment a girl was born into a noble family, her looks became part of her family's status. Marriage in those times was rarely about love. It was often a calculated alliance between families, and a beautiful daughter could be a valuable bargaining chip. If she matched the fashionable ideal, she could attract a wealthier match. If not, she might be overlooked or married to someone far less influential. People also believed beauty revealed the soul. Pale, clear skin was linked to purity and moral worth. Bright eyes meant health and vitality. Smooth, symmetrical features suggested noble blood. On the other hand, a rough complexion, scars, or a sun-darkened face could be read as laziness, sin, or low status. These ideas were everywhere, in church sermons, in romantic poems, and even in the artwork of the time. The difference between noble women and working women was easy to see. Pale skin was a luxury for those who didn't labor in the fields. Peasants had no choice but to work under the sun, which left them tanned and weathered. For noble women, avoiding sunlight was a daily priority, because even a short time outdoors could undo weeks of careful maintenance. Appearance was a kind of silent language. Everyone could read it at a glance. Keeping up this ideal wasn't optional. For upper-class women, beauty was part of their role, just as important as managing servants or hosting guests. Cosmetics were used to transform the body into a living symbol of refinement. A noble woman's face, hair, and clothing told the world not just who she was, but what her family was worth. Religion made the rules even trickier. Some church leaders praised beauty as proof of God's creation. Others warned it could lead to vanity or temptation. Women were told to be modest, yet they were also expected to appear graceful and pleasing. It was a constant balancing act between elegance and restraint, with no clear way to please everyone. Poems and courtly romances repeated the same ideal lady again and again. Skin like snow or ivory, lips small and rose-colored, a straight nose, eyes bright and clear, hair golden or deep chestnut, shining like silk, a high forehead thought to show intelligence, a slender waist with soft curves, delicate white hands with no trace of labor, every movement slow and graceful. Even her laughter had to be soft and controlled. Meeting this ideal took work, dangerous work. Lead-based powders whitened the skin, but slowly poisoned the wearer. Women plucked their hairlines to create a higher forehead. Harsh chemicals lightened hair. Tight dresses shaped the body and forced an upright posture. Manners were practiced until they became second nature. From how to lift a cup to the way one lowered her gaze in conversation. Skipping the daily routine was unthinkable. Natural beauty was not admired unless it matched the standard. Neglecting one's appearance could be seen as laziness or a sign of disrespect to one's family. For noble women, beauty was both armor and a set of chains, protecting their position, but also limiting their freedom. Men judged women instantly by appearance. A glance could decide whether she was worth courting, marrying, or supporting. Women knew they were being watched this way, so the pressure never faded. Even at church or a festival, their looks were part of the conversation before they even spoke. Every part of the body had meaning. Pale skin meant leisure. A high forehead meant intelligence. Soft hands meant wealth. These physical signs worked like a code, and everyone knew how to read it. This is why beauty in the medieval world was never just about attraction. It was about identity, status, and survival. Daily life revolved around this constant performance. The morning might begin with scented water to cleanse the skin. Then powders, careful hair arrangements, and choosing a dress that flattered the figure. Even walking, sitting, and turning the head had to be done the right way. By the end of the day, beauty had been performed just as carefully as a play on a stage. The goal was not to look natural or healthy. It was to look like someone from a story, untouched by hard work or the elements, to appear rare, almost unreal. This image could open doors, but it also built invisible walls, keeping women inside the roles society gave them. In the end, these impossible standards turned beauty into a full-time job. They promised social rewards, but demanded constant labor and self-sacrifice. For many women, their appearance spoke louder than their voice or their mind ever could. In the next part, we'll see how the most important feature of all, pale skin, became the ultimate symbol of purity and wealth, and why women would go to such dangerous lengths to protect it. In the medieval world, pale skin was far more than a matter of personal taste. It was a living signal of who you were, what you did, and where you belonged in the social order. The lighter and clearer your complexion, the more it announced that you were above hard labor, that you had the luxury to stay indoors, and that your life was cushioned from the exhausting work that darkened and roughened the skin of the poor. Pale skin was a badge of both purity and privilege, and it was instantly recognized everywhere you went. For noble women, the pursuit of a perfect white complexion began in childhood. Mothers and governesses taught young girls to avoid sunlight at all costs, not simply for beauty, but to preserve their status. Girls were encouraged to play in shaded courtyards or under the cover of awnings, and outings during the brightest hours of the day were often avoided altogether. It was a daily discipline, not unlike the way knights trained for combat, except here, the battle was against the sun. The cultural meaning behind pale skin ran deep. It linked directly to the idea of moral purity, with lightness of complexion often compared to the innocence of angels in paintings and manuscripts. Writers of the time, especially those crafting romantic ballads, would praise the fair face of a noble woman as if it were proof of her virtuous heart. Church sermons sometimes echoed these ideas, warning that the body was a reflection of the soul and that visible flaws could signal spiritual corruption. We must also remember that in the medieval climate, outdoor work was brutal. Peasants and laborers spent long hours under the sun, and their darker, rougher skin became an unchangeable mark of their station in life. This made pale skin not just attractive, but exclusive, a privilege that only the wealthy could realistically maintain. Simply looking at a person's complexion could tell you almost instantly whether they belonged in the Lord's hall or in the fields beyond its walls. To maintain such skin in a world without sunscreen was a serious challenge. Women shielded themselves with wide-brimmed hats, veils, and hoods. Some carried parasols or even had servants hold fabric screens to block sunlight during travel. Wealthy women in cities like Venice or Paris might even wear thin gauze masks when walking outdoors, so their faces never felt the sun's touch directly. Each of these steps sent the same quiet message: my skin is too precious to risk, and I can afford to protect it. Of course, nature was not always kind, and pale skin could be lost to freckles, blemishes, or the natural flush of heat. That is where medieval cosmetics came into play, and they were far from safe. Lead-based powders, ground chalk, and even mercury compounds were used to whiten the face, despite the fact that they slowly poisoned the skin, and sometimes the wearer's entire body. A noble woman might notice her teeth darkening or her hair thinning over time. But the social cost of being seen with a tanned or uneven complexion often outweighed the dangers. One of the most telling aspects of pale skin was that it worked as a silent introduction. At feasts, tournaments, or church gatherings, a woman with an unblemished white face could enter a room and immediately be read as refined, desirable, and well-bred. She might not need to speak a single word before others made assumptions about her upbringing, her manners, and even her marriage prospects. In many ways, her skin served as her most persuasive form of self-advertisement. Men, too, sometimes sought to maintain pale skin, especially those of high rank. However, the pressure was far more intense for women, because their worth in the marriage market and in polite society was often tied directly to their looks. A nobleman might still be respected if weather and war had darkened his skin, but for a noblewoman, losing that paleness could mean a sharp decline in how she was treated. Art and literature reinforced the standard constantly. In illuminated manuscripts, saints and queens were often painted with skin so white it seemed to glow, while villains and witches were sometimes depicted with darker or mottled skin to visually signal their moral failings. These patterns in art didn't just reflect beauty ideals, they helped shape them, embedding the idea that to be fair-skinned was to be both beautiful and good. Maintaining the ideal could require constant effort, especially during summer months. Women might stay indoors for weeks at a time, and their rooms would be arranged to let in filtered light rather than direct sun. Some applied layers of powder each morning to even out the complexion, carefully dusting over the neck and chest so no natural skin tone was visible. If a flush appeared from heat or embarrassment, a thin layer of powder could be reapplied in private before rejoining company. There were even recipes for skin whitening treatments passed down through generations. Some called for mixing egg whites with ground lily root, applied as a mask overnight. Others used vinegar steeped with white lead, or a paste made from ground pearls for those who could afford it. These treatments were expensive, time-consuming, and often hazardous, but abandoning them risked losing the delicate paleness that defined a noblewoman's image. The desire for pale skin also shaped fashion. Necklines were designed to expose the upper chest and shoulders so that the whiteness of the skin could be displayed like fine jewelry. In some courts, sleeves were slit to reveal the inner arms, which were less exposed to the sun and therefore naturally paler. These choices turned the body into a canvas for displaying the prized complexion, making it part of the overall presentation of wealth and refinement. The irony, of course, is that while pale skin was valued for its supposed naturalness, it was rarely left to nature. It required constant defense against sunlight, elaborate cosmetics, and endless care. In this way, the complexion was not just a sign of status, it was proof of the work, time, and resources a woman could devote to her appearance. In the next part, we will explore how hair, its color, texture, and arrangement became another defining feature of medieval beauty, and why golden locks or carefully styled braids could be just as socially powerful as the palest skin. In the medieval world, hair was more than a frame for the face. It was a statement of identity, health, and virtue. While pale skin spoke of leisure and purity, the right hair color, style, and texture could amplify a woman's desirability, elevate her reputation, and even affect the fortunes of her family. It was both a natural feature and a carefully managed symbol, one that could carry as much weight as the finest jewelry or the most costly gown. Golden or light-colored hair was considered the height of beauty in many European courts. This preference drew from both ancient Roman ideals and Christian symbolism, where light hair was linked to angels, saints, and the purity of divine light. Poets compared it to spun gold or rays of sunlight, and artists painted heroines with locks that seemed to glow. A noblewoman blessed with naturally fair hair was considered fortunate, but those without it often went to great lengths and great risks to achieve the effect. Bleaching was a common practice, though it was far from gentle. Women might mix a paste from saffron, alum, and even lye, applying it to their hair before sitting in the sun for hours to let the color change. In Italy, a popular method involved wearing a wide-brimmed hat with the crown cut out, allowing only the hair to be exposed while the face stayed shaded. Over time, repeated bleaching could leave the hair brittle and dry, but the resulting pale color was considered worth the damage. For brunettes and darker-haired women, other strategies existed. Some used crushed chamomile flowers steeped in water to bring out lighter tones, while others applied honey or vinegar rinses to subtly lift color. The wealthiest could afford imported powders that added a golden sheen temporarily, useful for festivals or important gatherings when one needed to look their absolute best. These methods could be time-consuming, but the effect was powerful. Hair that caught the light in a crowded hall was hard to ignore. Hair length also carried meaning. Long, uncut hair on an unmarried woman was a sign of youth and virginity, often worn loose or in simple braids. Once married, women typically covered their hair in public, using veils, wimples, or elaborate headdresses, which varied from region to region. However, even hidden hair was carefully maintained, for it might still be revealed in private settings or special occasions, and a lush, healthy mane reflected well on a woman's care and discipline. Braids and intricate styles became another form of display. In noble courts, hair could be woven with ribbons, pearls, or threads of gold. These embellishments were not just decoration, they were visible markers of wealth, since fine silk ribbons and real gemstones were far beyond the reach of commoners. A lady's hairstyle might take hours to arrange, requiring the help of skilled attendants who knew how to layer braids, loops, and twists into symmetrical patterns. Certain styles became fashionable through royal influence. If a queen appeared at a feast with her hair coiled high under a jeweled net, noble women across the court might rush to imitate it. This spread of trends meant that hair could act as a subtle form of politics, a visual sign of loyalty to a monarch or alignment with a certain faction in court life. In this way, a hairstyle was not just a personal choice, but a small act of diplomacy. Hair also carried moral weight. Church authorities sometimes warned against overly elaborate styles, fearing they encouraged vanity or distracted from spiritual duties. Some preachers compared women's hair to a net that could trap men into temptation, urging them to keep it covered. Yet, despite these warnings, elaborate hair arrangements remained popular, especially during festivals or weddings when display was expected. Natural texture played a role as well. While straight, fine hair was often idealized in paintings, soft waves and loose curls were praised in poetry for their romantic quality. In regions like France and England, noble women sometimes used heated metal rods, an early form of curling iron, to shape their hair for special events. These tools could scorch the hair if mishandled, but they offered a way to achieve fashionable textures that nature had not provided. Fragrance became part of hair care too. Scented oils made from rosemary, lavender, or rose petals were massaged into the hair to add shine and a pleasant aroma. These treatments masked the smells of everyday medieval life and signaled refinement to those standing close enough to notice. For some, this was as important as the color or style, for fragrance hinted at cleanliness and luxury. The way hair framed the face could also be manipulated to suit beauty ideals. A high, smooth forehead was prized. So many women plucked or shaved their hairlines to raise it. This practice, strange to modern eyes, was seen as elegant and intelligent, and it worked in harmony with the long, flowing locks that fell behind it. Combined with pale skin and delicate features, this created a look that was considered almost ethereal. Men's hair also followed social codes, though with less variety. Noblemen might wear their hair shoulder length and well-groomed, sometimes curled at the ends or scented with oils. Knights returning from campaigns often had sun-lightened hair from long days outdoors, which could be seen as either rugged or less refined depending on the setting. Still, women bore the greater pressure to meet and maintain specific hair ideals, since their beauty was so tightly linked to social value. The attention given to hair reveals how deeply medieval beauty standards shaped daily life. Whether it was bleaching in the sun, braiding with jewels, or hiding it beneath layers of silk, hair was never a casual matter. It was cultivated, managed, and displayed according to a complex web of expectations, a living crown that could signal status, virtue, and desirability all at once. In the next part, we'll explore the medieval obsession with the forehead and facial structure, and how women went to surprising and sometimes painful lengths to shape their faces to match the most coveted look of the age. In the Middle Ages, a person's face was often treated like a map, believed to reveal clues about their inner character, intelligence, and social worth. Among the many features judged and admired, the forehead stood out as a surprisingly important focus of beauty. A high, smooth forehead was considered elegant, refined, and intelligent. To our modern eyes, this might seem like an unusual priority, but in medieval Europe, it was a feature that could instantly signal whether someone met the upper-class ideal. The high forehead ideal was partly inherited from earlier European art and Roman portraiture, where philosophers and noblewomen were often depicted with open, unlined foreheads. By the 14th and 15th centuries, this preference had blended with Christian imagery, where saints and the Virgin Mary were painted with broad, unbroken foreheads to symbolize purity of thought. Painters like Jan van Eyck and Rogier van der Weyden amplified this look in their portraits, further cementing the high forehead as a sign of intelligence and moral virtue. To achieve the look, many women deliberately altered their hairlines. This was done by plucking or shaving the hair from the front of the scalp, moving the hairline several centimeters higher. The process was slow and meticulous, often repeated every few days to prevent regrowth from ruining the desired effect. Some women even applied herbal ointments that slowed hair growth in the plucked area, making it easier to maintain. The practice was not limited to the nobility, but only those with wealth and leisure could do it consistently. For working-class women, maintaining such a high forehead was impractical, since it required time, privacy, and tools that were not always available. This meant the look remained a visual marker of privilege. Simply glancing at a woman's forehead could tell you whether she belonged to the manor hall or the marketplace. The forehead also worked in harmony with other facial features to create the era's ideal shape. A soft, oval face was considered the most attractive, with smooth curves that flowed from temple to jawline. Sharp angles were often avoided in portraiture, as they were thought to look harsh or masculine. Artists softened jawlines and reduced the prominence of cheekbones in their work, not to distort reality, but to align with the beauty ideals their patrons wanted to project. Complexion played a role here too. A high forehead was most impressive when paired with pale, unblemished skin that reflected light evenly. This gave the face an almost glowing quality in the flicker of candlelight or the soft daylight of a shaded garden. Women might dust their foreheads with lead-based powder or chalk to create this effect, blending it carefully so there was no visible transition from forehead to the rest of the face. Eyebrows were also shaped to enhance the forehead's prominence. Many women plucked them thin or removed them entirely, so there was more uninterrupted skin between the eyes and the hairline. This created an exaggerated expanse of pale skin that made the forehead seem even larger. In some portraits, the absence of eyebrows is so striking that modern viewers mistake it for artistic style, when in reality, it reflected a real and fashionable choice of the time. Facial symmetry added to the allure. People in the Middle Ages believed symmetry reflected balance and moral goodness. A perfectly centered nose, evenly spaced eyes, and a proportionate forehead were all signs of an ideal face. While no one had perfect symmetry, cosmetics and careful grooming helped create the illusion. Women might lightly tint their lips and cheeks to balance the visual weight of the forehead, creating harmony across the face. Regional variations existed as well. In France and Burgundy, the high forehead with elaborate hennin headdresses, the tall, cone-shaped hats often seen in fairy tale depictions of princesses. These hats, with their veils flowing behind, drew the eye upward and made the forehead appear even higher. In England and parts of the Low Countries, veils and structured headpieces framed the forehead more closely. emphasizing smoothness over height, but still keeping the focus on that area of the face. For noble women, the forehead was also a stage for subtle communication. A serene, composed expression, combined with the visual power of the high forehead, conveyed dignity, restraint, and readiness for courtly life. In an age when women were often judged before they spoke, this silent message could be as persuasive as any spoken introduction. Not all reactions were positive, however. Some church leaders criticized the practice of hairline alteration, calling it vanity and an unnatural defiance of God's design. Preachers warned that women who plucked their hairlines too high risked appearing grotesque or attracting the wrong kind of attention. Yet these warnings rarely slowed the trend among the elite, where beauty standards and social advantage often outweighed moral lectures. The forehead's importance also intersected with age. In youth, the skin was naturally smooth, which made the feature easier to idealize. As women aged and fine lines appeared, some turned to ointments, wax-based fillers, or heavier powders to maintain the unbroken surface. In a society that valued youthful beauty for its social and marital advantages, these small interventions could mean the difference between admiration and being overlooked. Men's foreheads were less scrutinized, though in portraiture, a broad and unlined forehead could still suggest intelligence and leadership. Knights, scholars, and courtiers were often painted with slightly exaggerated foreheads, even if their real features didn't match. This artistic choice aligned them visually with the same virtues prized in women: intellect, morality, and refinement. What makes the medieval focus on the forehead so fascinating is how it demonstrates the era's blending of art, religion, and social ambition. A simple stretch of skin became a cultural symbol, loaded with meaning that reached far beyond appearance. It was a sign of discipline, wealth, education, and status, all visible in a single glance. In the next part, we will turn our attention to the medieval body shape ideal, how women's figures were shaped, controlled, and sometimes painfully restricted to meet the standards of elegance, and why those physical ideals were as much about social control as they were about beauty. In the medieval imagination, beauty was not limited to the face. It was deeply tied to the proportions, softness, and presence of the body as a whole. While modern culture often swings between dramatically different ideals, medieval Europe's beauty standards held steady for centuries, shaped by religion, classical influence, and the silent rules of aristocratic society. These ideals were more than personal preferences. They were codes embedded in clothing, posture, and even daily routines that could silently reveal a person's class and worth. For women of the upper classes, the most admired figure was soft, rounded, and gracefully proportioned. The waist was expected to be narrow, but not sharply defined, shoulders gentle and sloping, and the bust and hips full enough to suggest health and fertility. This was not a figure meant to shock with its sensuality. It was meant to convey stability, abundance, and a life untouched by hunger or hardship. In an age when famine was a constant threat, a well-fed body was more than attractive. It was proof of privilege. Art reinforced this preference again and again. Painters like Simone Martini in Italy and Rogier van der Weyden in the Low Countries portrayed noblewomen draped in fabrics that skimmed their curves without clinging tightly. Sculptures on cathedral facades depicted saints and noble patrons with soft outlines, avoiding harsh angles. In illuminated manuscripts, noble ladies were shown with flowing garments that fell like gentle waves, turning the body into an elegant frame for luxurious clothing. Clothing itself became the greatest tool for shaping and emphasizing the ideal. In the early Middle Ages, gowns were loose and draping, creating a tall, column-like effect. But by the 14th and 15th centuries, tailoring had advanced. The cotehardie, with its fitted bodice and flared skirt, allowed women to subtly accentuate the waist. The sideless surcoat, often worn over a rich undergown, created a dramatic vertical line It drew the eye upward while still revealing the figure beneath. Achieving the ideal often required a network of garments. A linen chemise served as the base layer, absorbing sweat and protecting fine outer fabrics. Over this, a fitted kirtle could be laced snugly to smooth the torso and support the bust. The wealthiest women had these underdresses custom tailored, with side lacing or back lacing panels that allowed for subtle shaping. While not as rigid as Renaissance corsets, they could still compress the waist enough to refine the silhouette. Diet was a quiet but powerful factor. A noblewoman's meals included fine white bread, roasted meats, fresh fruits, and pastries sweetened with honey or imported sugar. Such foods were out of reach for most peasants, whose diets were dominated by coarse bread, pottage, and occasional scraps of meat. The softness admired in noblewomen could not be sustained without this abundance. In fact, some medieval physicians even linked a fuller, well-nourished figure to higher moral character, claiming that physical beauty reflected divine favor. Posture was equally important. Straight backs, high chins, and measured steps were not only graceful, they were learned habits. Girls in noble households were trained from an early age to move slowly and deliberately, so their skirts never tangled and their balance never faltered. Even sitting was choreographed. Feet tucked neatly, hands folded lightly, shoulders relaxed but upright. These small performances signaled refinement to anyone watching. Pregnancy and motherhood, though valued for their role in family lineage, were handled with discretion in public. Dresses could be cut with extra fabric to conceal the growing belly, maintaining the graceful shape that society expected. After childbirth, women of means were encouraged to regain their pre-pregnancy form quickly, aided by attendants, supportive garments, and restorative diets. Regional preferences added layers of variation. In Northern Europe, England, Flanders, and Burgundy, the fuller figure was openly celebrated. Rich, heavy fabrics like velvet and brocade added volume to the form, and winter clothing naturally favored layered silhouettes. In Italy, influenced by the legacy of Roman statuary and Mediterranean elegance, the ideal leaned slightly slimmer, emphasizing proportion and posture over fullness. In France, fashion often struck a balance between the two, with the body shaped subtly by long trailing gowns and carefully cinched belts. Religious influence was never far away. The church publicly preached modesty, warning against vanity and excessive display of the body. Yet in practice, courtly fashion found ways to work within and sometimes around these rules. Long sleeves, high necklines, and floor-length skirts satisfied moral guidelines, while clever tailoring and expensive fabrics quietly displayed the figure beneath. A dress could conform to religious modesty while still broadcasting wealth and beauty to anyone who knew how to read the signs. Literature reflected these ideals as well. Courtly romances described heroines as gracefully rounded or shaped like a noble lily, language that emphasized elegance over raw sensuality. Troubadour poetry in Provence often praised women whose bodies flowed like silk, pairing physical beauty with the virtues of loyalty, kindness, and wisdom. In this way, the body was woven into the larger tapestry of a woman's worth, never standing alone, but always connected to her perceived moral and social value. The pressure to embody this ideal was immense. Girls from noble families absorbed it almost unconsciously, watching their mothers and elder sisters dress, move, and speak in ways that reinforced the standard. Tailors, maids, and hairdressers all participated in maintaining the illusion. It was not enough to be born with the right proportions. One had to live them, day after day, in every gesture and public appearance. Men had their own physical standards, though they were shaped by different values. Broad shoulders, a strong chest, and a lean waist were admired, signaling readiness for war, riding, and leadership. Knights were often idealized in poetry as having a noble form, but their bodies were praised for their utility as much as their beauty. While women's figures were tied to fertility and refinement, men's were linked to strength, honor, and martial skill. Ultimately, the medieval ideal body shape was never just about beauty. It was a carefully managed signal, a visual language that told observers who you were, where you belonged, and how much influence you might wield. Through clothing, posture, diet, and discipline, noble women and men alike learned to speak this language fluently. And for women especially, failing to master it could mean fading into social obscurity. In the next part, we will turn to the language of fabric and color, how medieval fashion choices could transform appearance, project wealth, and even carry coded messages understood only by those in the know. In medieval Europe, beauty was never just skin deep. It was wrapped, quite literally, in layers of fabric that told the world who you were, what you owned, and how much power you carried. Clothing was more than protection from the cold or a way to look pleasant. It was a visual language, one so finely tuned that a single shade of cloth could reveal your wealth, rank, and even moral character before you spoke a word. Color was the most immediate signal. In an age before chemical dyes, producing rich, lasting colors was expensive, labor-intensive, and often dangerous. The brightest reds, for example, came from kermes, a dye extracted from tiny insects found on oak trees in the Mediterranean. Deep blues were made from imported indigo, or, in Northern Europe, painstakingly processed woad plants. These dyes could take weeks to prepare and cost more than an entire laborer's yearly wage for enough to dye a gown. Because of their cost, colors became powerful status symbols. Royal blue, deep crimson, and rich purple were strongly associated with the upper classes and often restricted by sumptuary laws, legal rules that dictated who could wear what. In England, for instance, certain shades of purple and gold were reserved for royalty and high nobility. A merchant's wife could be fined if she dared to appear in the same colors as a duchess. These laws were not just about fashion control. They reinforced the visible hierarchy of medieval society. Fabric was just as important as color. The wealthy dressed in silks imported from Byzantium or later, from the Italian city-states like Venice and Lucca. Silk's sheen caught candlelight and sunlight alike, making it shimmer in a way no wool or linen could. Velvets, when they became popular in the later Middle Ages, were so costly that a single gown could represent a small fortune. Fine wools, tightly woven and smooth, were a mark of respectability, while coarse, scratchy wool was the daily reality for peasants. Even within the same fabric type, quality varied enormously. Linen, for example, could be woven into a smooth, almost silky texture for noble undergarments or left rough and heavy for peasant shirts. A noble woman's chemise might be so fine that it was nearly transparent, even though it was never meant to be seen in public. The hidden luxury of such garments was part of the performance of beauty. Knowing you wore the finest, even beneath your outer layers, was itself a statement. Patterns and embroidery added another layer of meaning. Gold thread embroidery, often using real gold spun into fine strands, decorated the hems and cuffs of noble clothing. These designs could include heraldic symbols, religious imagery, or floral patterns that carried personal or family significance. In some courts, embroidery served as a subtle form of competition. The more intricate and detailed the work, the higher the skill and the deeper the purse of the wearer's household. The choice of colors could even carry moral weight. White, for example, was linked to purity and innocence, often worn by brides and young maidens in portraiture. Black could signify mourning, but was also, in some wealthy courts like Burgundian society, a fashionable and dignified color for formal events. Red was more complicated. It symbolized passion and power, making it a popular choice for both noblewomen and kings, yet some church leaders warned against it as overly provocative for women. Season and occasion shaped fashion choices as well. In winter, noble women layered heavy wools lined with fur, often sable ermine, or miniver, luxuries that were imported and costly. In summer, lighter silks and linens took over, though these were often just as expensive due to the fine weaving and imported materials. Wedding garments were especially elaborate, frequently incorporating rare fabrics, exotic colors, and embroidery that could take months to complete. For men, color and fabric carried similar messages. A knight might wear a deep red surcoat over his armor to project boldness, while a court official could choose dark blue or black to emphasize dignity and authority. Wealthy men often lined their cloaks with fur, not just for warmth, but to display their status as someone who could afford imported luxuries. Sumptuary laws ensured that even in a crowded marketplace, you could identify a person's social standing from across the square. In Florence, certain fabrics were reserved for the ruling elite, and in France, a law under Philip the Fair banned middle-class women from wearing jeweled belts. In England, servants were forbidden from wearing silk. These laws might seem petty now, but in a rigidly structured society, fashion was one of the clearest ways to keep the classes visually distinct. The art of combining color and fabric was taught from a young age in noble households. Girls learned not only how to dress themselves, but how to match tones to their complexion, how to arrange their veils or headdresses for the most flattering effect, and how to balance jewelry with embroidery so that neither overwhelmed the other. This training was a lifelong skill, essential for navigating court life. Clothing also had a performative role in romance and politics. A noblewoman might wear her family colors to signal loyalty during a diplomatic visit, or adopt the colors of her husband's family at public festivals to demonstrate unity. In tournaments, ladies sometimes wore gowns or scarves in their chosen knight's heraldic colors, turning themselves into living symbols of alliance and affection. The interplay of color, fabric, and design in medieval beauty standards was not just about personal taste. It was about broadcasting a message to the world without speaking. A single glance at a gown could tell you the wearer's wealth, rank, region, marital status, and sometimes even political loyalties. In a society where reputation was currency, a careful curation of one's wardrobe was as important as any spoken word. In the next part, we will explore the world of hair and headwear, from elaborate braided crowns to towering hennons, and how the framing of the face could enhance or destroy a woman as beauty in the eyes of medieval society. In the medieval world, the beauty of a woman's face was never seen in isolation. It was framed, elevated, and often transformed entirely by the hair and headwear she wore. For noble women especially, the arrangement of hair and the choice of coverings was more than personal style. It was a public statement of identity, wealth, and moral standing. It was an art form with its own rules, deeply tied to religion, court etiquette, and regional fashion trends. Hair itself was considered one of the most alluring features a woman could possess, yet paradoxically, in much of medieval Europe, it was rarely shown uncovered after a woman reached marriageable age. Loose hair was associated with virginity and innocence, which is why young unmarried girls might appear in festivals with their locks flowing down their backs or arranged in soft braids. Once a woman married, however, modesty and social codes dictated that hair should be concealed in public, not erased entirely, but transformed into part of a larger composition of veils, caps, and structured headpieces. Among the wealthy, hair was far from neglected under these coverings. In France and England, golden hair was prized above all, and women sometimes went to great lengths to lighten their hair with herbal rinses made from chamomile, saffron, and even mixtures of ash or vinegar, despite the damage such treatments could cause over time. In Italy, where naturally dark hair was more common, shimmering black braids tied with ribbons were seen as the height of elegance, sometimes dusted with fragrant powders to give them a luxurious scent during court events. Braiding itself was a display of skill and refinement. In Germany and Scandinavia, hair could be woven into elaborate crown-like plaits that wrapped around the head, giving the impression of a coronet. In some cases, small beads, strips of silk, or even thin strands of gold wire were braided in, catching the light and turning the hairstyle into living jewelry. For special occasions, these braids might be combined with coiled buns secured by ornate pins tipped with pearls or gemstones. The coverings that framed these hairstyles ranged from the simple to the astonishingly complex. At its most basic, the veil was a rectangular or square piece of fine linen draped over the head and pinned beneath the chin. But in aristocratic circles, the veil became the foundation for increasingly elaborate headwear. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Europe saw the rise of structured headdresses that could tower above the head, flare outward, or create dramatic silhouettes. One of the most iconic examples was the hennin, made famous in the courts of Burgundy and France. This cone-shaped headdress, sometimes over 2 feet high, was often wrapped in silk or velvet and crowned with a sheer veil that cascaded down the back like a waterfall. Wearing a hennin was a balancing act, literally, and its height could make doorways an obstacle that demanded graceful ducking. The sheer impracticality of such a piece was part of its statement. It showed that the wearer was of a rank where she never needed to work or move hastily. Other striking designs included the escoffion, a padded and wired headdress shaped like 2 sweeping horns, fashionable in the late 14th century. The space between the horns might be covered with a fine net, sometimes woven from threads of actual gold. In Italy, the balzo created a rounded frame high on the head, often wrapped in richly embroidered fabric and accented with jewels. In England, the gable hood, named for its resemblance to the pointed gables of houses, framed the face with structured dignity, evolving into a style that remained fashionable well into the Tudor period. Beneath these outer layers, women often wore coifs, close-fitting linen caps that smoothed the hair and protected the expensive outer fabrics from oils and perspiration. These coifs could be plain for daily use or edged with lace for formal occasions. In colder climates, hoods and headdresses were sometimes lined with fur, blending warmth with prestige, especially when using rare furs like ermine or sable. Altering the hairline was another surprising practice. In Burgundy and certain French courts of the 15th century, a high forehead was considered a mark of refinement and intellect. To achieve this, women plucked or shaved the hairline, sometimes removing their eyebrows entirely, creating an elongated facial shape that matched the fashion of the time. This look is immortalized in portraits by artists like Rogier van der Weyden and Hans Memling, where the serene, pale faces seem to emerge like porcelain ovals from the frame of their headwear. Jewelry often played a supporting role, transforming hair and headwear into dazzling displays. Jeweled pins secured veils, gold circlets sat atop pennons, and delicate chains draped across the forehead sparkled in candlelight during evening feasts. In Italian portraits of noblewomen, you can see reticellas, gold-threaded nets wrapping around braids, turning the hair itself into a precious ornament. Religious influence was never far from these choices. Nuns wore the wimple, which covered the neck and chin and framed the face, a style that pious laywomen sometimes adopted for periods of mourning or penitence. In certain regions, strict moral codes dictated that married women never appear in public with their hair uncovered, regardless of rank. Even in courts, where fashion pushed the limits of extravagance, the symbolism of modesty remained important. Regional differences gave the medieval world a variety of headwear cultures. In Scandinavia, practical caps and veils were often layered beneath fur-lined hoods in winter. In the hot climates of southern Spain and Sicily, lighter silk veils protected the head from sun and dust, sometimes scented with rosewater to provide a cooling aroma. In the wealthy cities of the Low Countries, towering structured headpieces became so large that satirists mocked them in illustrations. Yet this only made them more desirable among the elite. Headwear also communicates silent messages. A widow might choose subdued colors and a simple veil, signaling her status and mourning. A bride might wear a lavish new hennin with a veil edged in gold lace, marking her recent marriage. A lady-in-waiting might subtly echo the colors of her mistress's gown, reinforcing her loyalty and role. Men had their own headwear traditions, from simple woolen coifs worn under armor to wide-brimmed hats with feathers for court appearances. A knight's carefully styled hair, revealed after removing a helm, was a statement of both martial prowess and personal refinement. In all cases, the combination of hair and headwear served as a stage for the face, the focal point of medieval beauty. Whether concealed in layers of fine linen and velvet, or adorned with braids wrapped in gold, the head was the crowning element of appearance, carrying more meaning than any single feature. In the next part, we will turn to the fascinating and sometimes dangerous world of medieval cosmetics, from harmless herbal balms to deadly lead-based powders, and explore how the desire to enhance beauty could come at a staggering cost to health and even life. In the medieval period, the art of beauty did not stop with clothing, jewelry, and headwear. The face and skin itself were carefully tended to, sometimes with natural, soothing remedies, and other times with substances that could quietly damage the body over weeks, months, or years. Cosmetics were both a luxury and a risk, a balancing act between enhancing one's appearance and maintaining one's health in a world where medical understanding was limited, superstition was common, and dangerous materials were often mistaken for miraculous beautifiers. The first step in any medieval beauty regimen was cleansing, though soap as we know it today was not universally used. In much of Europe, especially in wealthier households, washing the face with warm water infused with herbs was common. Rosemary, lavender, and rose petals were popular choices, their fragrance lending a sense of refinement, while their oils softened the skin. In Italy, lemon or orange peel was sometimes rubbed on the face for both scent and a subtle brightening effect. In colder regions like England and the Low Countries, warming balms made with beeswax and animal fat were applied to protect the skin from the chill air, particularly in winter. The next focus was complexion, one of the most important indicators of beauty in the medieval mind. Pale skin was not just a fashion, it was a signal of status. A woman who was fair of face was assumed to live a life sheltered from the sun, away from manual labor. Achieving or maintaining this pallor could be natural for some, but many turned to cosmetics to exaggerate the effect. One of the most dangerous substances used was white lead, ground into a fine powder and mixed with vinegar or egg whites to create a paste. When applied, it gave the skin a smooth, almost porcelain-like finish, but over time, it could cause headaches, hair loss, skin lesions, and even organ damage. Despite these risks, which were poorly understood at the time, lead-based powders remained popular for centuries, used not only by women, but also by men at court who wished to appear fashionably pale. Other whitening methods were less toxic, though not always pleasant. A paste made from ground alabaster or chalk could be applied to the face, often mixed with honey to help it adhere. In some areas, women used a mixture of egg white and flour, which tightened the skin as it dried, creating a temporary lifting effect. Herbal lighteners, such as cucumber juice or parsley water, were used by those who either could not afford expensive powders or wished to avoid the harsher effects of lead. The lips and cheeks, too, were important features to highlight. A healthy blush suggested vitality and youth. And in an era when illness could quickly pale the complexion, a bit of color could make the difference between looking attractive and looking unwell. For this, many women used plant-based tints. Crushed berries like strawberries, raspberries, or elderberries were mixed with beeswax or animal fat to create a rudimentary lip balm and rouge. In some regions, red ochre, a naturally occurring clay pigment, was mixed with oil and applied sparingly to the cheeks. The eyebrows and eyes also received careful attention. While overly dramatic eye makeup was rare in most of medieval Europe, Due to religious modesty, subtle enhancements were common. In Italy and Spain, kohl, a dark powder made from ground minerals, was used to define the eyes and darken the lashes. In Northern Europe, women might darken their brows with soot or charred rosemary stems, both to create a more defined shape and to hide any graying hairs. Scent played a role in beauty as well, and perfumes or scented waters were considered part of a lady's toilette. In an age when bathing could be infrequent, especially in winter, fragrance was an important way to maintain an impression of cleanliness. Rose water, orange blossom water, and lavender distillations were stored in small glass bottles, ready to be dabbed onto the wrists, neck, or the hem of a gown so the scent would rise with movement. Musk and ambergris, imported at great cost from the East, were prized among the nobility for their lasting and exotic aromas. Hair care overlapped with cosmetics in many ways. Oils infused with rosemary or bay leaves were massaged into the scalp to encourage shine, while herbal rinses were used to enhance color. Chamomile for blondes, sage for brunettes, and a mixture of walnut shells for darker shades. Hair was often perfumed as well, with sachets of dried flowers sewn into the headwear, so that each movement released a subtle fragrance. Yet not all medieval cosmetic practices were harmless. In addition to white lard, another dangerous beauty aid was mercury, sometimes used in small amounts to treat blemishes or lighten skin. While it could reduce redness temporarily, prolonged exposure was poisonous, leading to trembling hands, cognitive decline, and other severe symptoms. Similarly, arsenic-based compounds appeared in some recipes for skin whitening, a reminder that the line between beautification and slow poisoning was dangerously thin. Despite the risks, these cosmetics were often passed down in guarded recipes from mother to daughter or shared among ladies at court, who viewed them as part of the refined arts of womanhood. In many ways, the willingness to endure discomfort, or even potential harm, for the sake of beauty was itself a social signal. It showed that one valued appearance enough to make sacrifices for it. Interestingly, not all medieval societies embraced the same cosmetic ideals. In some parts of the Islamic world, during the same period, henna was used to dye the hands and nails in intricate patterns, and kohl-lined eyes were celebrated for their dramatic effect. While Christian Europe leaned toward paleness and subtle enhancement, other cultures celebrated richer colors and bolder decoration. The pursuit of beauty in the medieval period was therefore a complex interplay of artistry, social signaling, and, at times, dangerous ignorance. Women balanced the desire to enhance their features with the reality that the very tools they used could erode the health those features depended on. In the next part, we will explore how beauty was displayed in motion, through the way people walked, danced, and carried themselves, because in the medieval world, elegance was as much about behavior as it was about appearance. In the medieval world, beauty was not confined to static images. A fine gown, flawless complexion, or jeweled headdress could capture attention in a portrait or feast hall. But what truly defined a person's allure was how they moved, carried themselves, and interacted with others. In a society where most people saw one another in communal gatherings at court, in marketplaces, during religious festivals, the performance of beauty was as important as the physical features themselves. Posture was one of the most immediate markers of refinement. A straight back, gently lowered shoulders, and chin held at a poised yet humble angle were considered signs of good breeding. This was not merely aesthetic. It was rooted in the medieval understanding of the body as a reflection of the soul. To slump was to signal laziness or moral weakness, while to stand upright conveyed discipline, self-respect, and a readiness to engage in courtly life. Manuals of etiquette from the later Middle Ages even described the correct way to stand for a lord or lady, with feet slightly apart, weight evenly balanced, and hands held calmly in front, never fidgeting or gesturing wildly without reason. Walking was equally codified. Noblewomen were taught to take measured steps. avoiding the hurried gait that might cause skirts to swish too widely or reveal the shoes. Beneath the hem, a subtle but important point in an age when modesty was prized. The pace was slow enough to display the fall of the fabric, yet steady enough to convey purpose. In some courts, it was fashionable for women to carry small prayer books or handkerchiefs as they walked, using them to occupy the hands and add to the impression of elegance. Dancing was a major venue for displaying both beauty and skill. Court dances of the Middle Ages varied by region, but many involved intricate patterns of steps, bows, and turns that required grace and coordination. In France, the basse danse was performed with a smooth, gliding motion, the feet barely leaving the floor, allowing the dancers' garments to flow around them like water. In Italy, more lively dances, such as the saltarello, included hops and quicker footwork, though still executed with a controlled lightness. To watch a skilled dancer was to see clothing, posture, and facial expression merge into a single performance of refinement. Hands, too, were part of the performance. In an era before gloves were universally worn, well-kept hands signaled wealth and care. A noblewoman might rest her fingertips lightly on a chair or table, avoiding tight grips or clenched fists. Gestures were deliberate, with an economy of motion meant to draw attention to the grace of the fingers rather than to the effort of the movement. For men, a controlled and confident use of the hands while speaking could convey authority and charisma without aggression. Facial expression was an art in itself. While modern beauty often prizes open smiles, medieval standards leaned toward serene composure. To be overly expressive risked appearing coarse or unserious. Women in particular were encouraged to maintain a soft, calm expression, neither blank nor animated, as a sign of modesty and self-control. This restraint in expression also aligned with the Christian ideal of temperance, in which outward calm reflected inner virtue. Conversation played an important role in this performance of beauty. The ability to speak eloquently, with a pleasing tone and well-chosen words, was as admired as a fine gown or sparkling jewel. In the courts of Burgundy and Aragon, for example, women were praised not only for their looks, but for their wit and ability to engage in courtoisie, the refined exchange of compliments, observations, and playful banter. A lady who could tell a clever story or compose a short verse on the spot was remembered long after her gown went out of fashion. The way one occupied space was also telling. In crowded gatherings, a person of high status did not jostle or rush, but moved as if the crowd parted naturally for them, whether it did or not. This aura of natural authority was cultivated through years of observing elders, practicing restraint, and knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. Even in seated positions, posture mattered. The back straight, the knees close together, the feet angled slightly, and the hands either folded in the lap or holding a prop like a fan, rosary, or folded letter. Public entrances were opportunities to make a lasting impression. Whether entering a feast hall, a church, or a nobleman's reception, the first sight others had of you mattered. Clothing was arranged in advance. The headwear was checked for balance, and the pace of entry was timed to draw the eye without seeming contrived. For the most important occasions, a person might be preceded by attendants carrying candles, flowers, or symbolic objects, underscoring their role and status in the gathering. In tournaments and festivals, the performance of beauty took on a more theatrical dimension. Ladies in the stands were as much part of the spectacle as the knights in the lists. A lady might wave a token, a ribbon, a glove to a competing knight, an act both romantic and public, reinforcing her own visibility in the social hierarchy. Her reactions to the contest, whether cheering quietly or offering a demure nod, were part of the unspoken script of courtly life. Even outside the nobility, the performance of beauty was important. In town markets, young women hoping to attract suitors would dress in their best available clothing and move through the stalls with measured steps. stopping to inspect goods in a way that allowed others to observe them. In rural communities, church was the primary setting for such displays, where posture during the service and composure afterward in the churchyard could shape one's reputation as much as actual conversation. Training in these arts often began in childhood for the upper classes. Girls were taught not only needlework and music, but also how to rise from a chair without disturbing their skirts, how to bow at the correct angle, and how to walk on uneven ground without stumbling or lifting the hem too high. Boys of noble birth learned how to greet elders with the correct combination of bow and eye contact, and how to carry themselves in armor or fine clothing without appearing awkward. In short, medieval beauty was not merely something one was born with. It was something performed, practiced, and perfected over time. To be truly admired was to master this silent language of posture, movement, and presence. A beautiful face might catch the eye, but a graceful bearing held it, turning passing glances into lasting impressions. In the next part, we will bring all these elements together, examining how clothing, grooming, and performance of beauty converged in the grand public events of the medieval world. From coronations and weddings to tournaments and religious festivals, the moments when all eyes were watching, and beauty became a matter of legacy. If the medieval world treated posture, grooming, and clothing as the brushstrokes of beauty, then public events were the grand canvases where those brushstrokes came together to form unforgettable portraits. It was in the bustling feasts, solemn ceremonies, and colorful festivals that beauty was displayed most fully, not just as a personal trait, but as a social statement, a family's pride, and even a political tool. These gatherings were moments when the sum of every careful preparation, from the texture of the fabrics to the curve of the bow, could speak louder than any herald's announcement. Among the most significant occasions for displaying beauty were coronations. These were not simply political events, but theatrical spectacles intended to overwhelm the senses. The great halls or cathedral naves were draped with banners, the air thick with incense, the sound of choirs echoing against stone vaults. The king or queen to be crowned appeared in garments heavy with gold thread, their hair arranged with precision, every jewel in place. Ladies of the court stood nearby, each in her finest gown, knowing that her posture and presence would be noted alongside the sovereign's grandeur. In these moments, beauty was inseparable from legitimacy. The appearance of order and magnificence helped secure the ruler's claim in the eyes of the people. Weddings were another prime stage for the performance of beauty, especially among the nobility. These events were often as much about alliances as they were about romance, and the clothing, jewels, and behavior of the bride and her attendants could communicate wealth, power, and cultural sophistication. A noble bride might wear layers of silk and velvet, the fabrics dyed in rare colors such as deep crimson or brilliant blue, shades reserved for those who could afford the costly pigments. Her hair might be arranged in elaborate braids threaded with pearls, while a veil of fine linen or even imported silk gauze floated over her shoulders. The groom, too, was expected to impress, not only with rich garments, but with the confident bearing of a man capable of providing and protecting. Every step of the ceremony, from the slow walk down the aisle to the exchange of vows, was observed with an eye for grace. In the sphere of entertainment, tournaments offered perhaps the most dramatic display of beauty and presence. Knights competed in jousts and melee combat, but the spectacle was incomplete without the ladies in the viewing stands, their gowns catching the sunlight, their veils and ribbons fluttering in the breeze. These women were not passive observers. Their tokens, a glove, a scarf, could inspire feats of daring from the men below. The presence of the court, resplendent in their finery, lent the event its sense of romance and chivalric honor. Even the way a lady leaned forward to watch a pass or clapped in approval was part of the performance. Religious festivals added another dimension to public displays of beauty. These events often involved processions through the streets, with participants dressed in their best garments, carrying candles or banners, moving in time to solemn music. For the faithful, the act of participating in these rituals was as much about devotion as about presentation. The finest clothes were worn, not to outshine others, but to honor the sacred occasion, though naturally, the visual impact could not be ignored. In towns and villages, such festivals were among the few opportunities for the lower classes to display their beauty alongside the elite, creating a shared but still stratified visual culture. Even in banquets and feasts, where the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine filled the air, the arrangement of people at the table was part of the spectacle. The most honored guests were placed where they could be seen by all, and the interplay of clothing colors, jewel flashes, and graceful gestures created a living tapestry under the flicker of candlelight. Conversation here was just as important as appearance. For a witty remark or a well-timed compliment could enhance one's allure as effectively as any embroidered gown. Traveling courts and royal progresses brought this theater of beauty to different regions, allowing more people to witness the elegance of their rulers and courtiers. These journeys required portable magnificence, tents hung with silks, traveling wardrobes filled with garments suited to various climates, and attendants skilled in dressing hair, arranging jewels, and repairing delicate fabrics. In these mobile displays, beauty was a form of diplomacy, impressing foreign dignitaries and reassuring distant subjects of the ruler's refinement. For the merchant and artisan classes, guild festivals and market fairs served as their grand stages. On these days, ordinary work clothes were replaced with garments saved for special occasions, perhaps a gown trimmed with fur, or a doublet cut in a fashionable style learned from the nobility. The way a merchant's wife moved among the stalls, inspecting wares with practiced elegance, could elevate her family's reputation as effectively as a successful sale. Beauty here was tied to prosperity and ambition, signaling both current success and future potential. Importantly, these public displays of beauty did not exist in isolation. They were recorded in chronicles, captured in illuminated manuscripts, and immortalized in the verses of troubadours and poets. A particularly graceful lady at a wedding might be compared to a saint in a devotional image. A knight whose bearing matched his armor's splendor could find himself celebrated in song. The memory of these events, shaped by art and literature, extended their influence far beyond the actual day, reinforcing the connection between appearance and social standing. What made these public displays so powerful was not only the visual splendor, but the shared understanding that beauty was a language everyone could read. The way a person dressed, moved, and interacted in these moments spoke volumes about their place in the social order, their family's aspirations, and even their moral character. To appear flawless in such settings was to affirm one's identity and strengthen one's position in the delicate hierarchy of medieval life. And so, in the great tapestry of the Middle Ages, beauty was never merely personal. It was communal, political, and deeply symbolic. From the cathedral steps at a coronation to the dusty field of a tournament, from the candlelit hall of a wedding feast to the winding streets of a festival procession, the medieval performance of beauty was an art form in its own right, one that combined centuries of tradition with the unique presence of each individual who stepped into the light.